A plan to make sure agencies work together.
Coerced into sexual activity and it's child abuse. It happened to a young woman we'll call Sharon, who was 12 and in a children's home.
These men looked normal, everyday kind of people. They didn't look scary, they didn't frighten me. They gave me everything that I needed, gave me a support network.
She told me, having gained her trust, they sold her for sex to men across British cities for 2 years.
After about 6 weeks, I was taken to one party at an arcade, and on the pool table there was a bag placed on the table. It had guns, ammunition, drugs. There was no way I was going to say, no, I can't do something. There was nothing I could do.
You were frightened of them?
I was frightened.
Sharon had nobody looking out for her. She was very vulnerable. But the government said today it would be a myth, the rest of us, to think that this sort of child exploitation only happens to children who are in care or have neglectful parents. They said that children in Britain are being sexually abused in far greater numbers than we ever imagined, and that what happened to Sharon could happen to any child from any background. All backgrounds, including the Barnardo's patron, the Duchess of Cornwall, were present today at the charities conference on child exploitation. There too, the Children's Minister and a host of agencies involved in the problem. They listened as Sharon bravely told her story. We must protect her identity and couldn't film her speech, but she implored, if the abusers can recognise vulnerable children, why can't we? Why can't we get to them before the guys do? This footage shows one gang on the hunt for teenage girls in Derby. The government says safeguarding children boards, which should be protecting kids, often ignore the problem.
This is happening in every city, in every town, in every village and rural area, up and down the country. And if you say that it's not a problem in your area, you're not looking for it. If you turn over the stones, you will find it. So LSCBs have got to have a reality check.
The government's new action plan says specialised training will be introduced for police and other agencies. There'll be more advice for parents to help recognise the signs of sexual exploitation, and robust prosecutions and better treatment of vulnerable witnesses. But what evidence is there that large numbers of children are being coerced, sometimes in return for as little as a packet of cigarettes? Official figures estimate 2,000 children are involved. But just a few weeks ago, Channel 4's Dispatches programme revealed that many cases go unreported, so the number may be far higher.
9 men were convicted of abusing 27 girls aged 12 to 16 in Derby.
There have been high-profile prosecutions, including a gang of mainly Asian abusers in Derby and a 19-year-old Devon man jailed for 10 years. Sharon was lucky to escape her tormentors, but she told me the awful fate of some of the other girls involved.
Some are missing, some are on drugs, some are out of it, a few are dead.
Katie Razzle, well, I'm joined now from Leeds by Alyas Karmani, Director of Street UK, which works with young people at risk of sexual violence and also is a Muslim preacher, and from Lancashire by Detective Superintendent Ian Critchley, Lancashire Police's Head of Public Protection. Detective Superintendent, a lot of the cases that we hear about at the moment involve, or seem to involve, groups of predominantly Asian men. Is this a problem that is associated with one community, or does it stretch across everywhere?
No, absolutely stretched across all our communities, both in terms of the victims that are being perpetrated against and those people who are committing these offences. It is right to say that in Lancashire and elsewhere we have found groups of Asian men have been committing exploitation of young people. But it's also right to say that offenders cut across all areas of our communities from all backgrounds, and we are absolutely committed to identifying who they are and stopping children being exploited and abused.
Do you think there is anything specific, Detective Superintendent, about the way it goes on in those Asian communities as compared to other communities? Or do you treat them all the same as well?
No, we are absolutely committed to identifying anybody who's abusing children within Lancashire, and that's why we work very closely with our partners from children's social care, from health and the voluntary sector, to encourage confidence of victims, carers and parents to come forward, however this exploitation takes place. And we're seeing an increased use of the internet, for example, of people grooming. We're seeing people purporting to be boyfriends of young girls and in some cases young boys by offering gifts and offering inducements. And we are often seeing groups and gangs acting together to exploit and abuse girls. We are absolutely committed to addressing this issue.
Mr. Karmani, I mean, this has been around in the news and being discussed in public forums now for a little while, for a few years. Do you think the Asian communities where people have been caught, if you like, are getting their heads around this and are prepared to confront it?
I think most definitely. Certainly we at Street, we've been addressing this issue for many years. And I think we've been saying for quite a long time, it's not an issue which is particular to Asian communities. This really cuts across the board. It's an issue around the UK, and we've actually framed it as a young urban male issue. And what we found is certainly where you've got drug supply, criminal gangs, and inevitably you're going to have pimping of girls and sexual abuse of children as well. So it's a pattern that we've known about for decades. Yes, I agree with you. There has been challenges in terms of certain communities, in particular the Pakistani community, actually taking responsibility for the small number of cases within, you know, their particular communities. But increasingly now, there's a generation of individuals who are very committed to actually confronting these issues head on and actually providing a solution to the problems. I think what we're increasingly recognizing are the risk factors, the individuals who are at risk of this violence, as well as the vulnerable girls as well who need safeguarding. So increasingly, as we become more aware of the issue, we have to be preventative. And certainly at Street, we've been addressing the issue quite head-on in West Yorkshire, in London, in areas where there are large Pakistani Muslim communities as well. And we're using our workshops to actually engage young men from these communities to actually challenge sexual violence across these communities as well. Because a lot of young...
Sorry to interrupt, but what about parents of children and people who might be at risk? I mean, what do you think they need to be doing, and do they need to change their own behaviour or boundaries or rules within the home?
Sorry, could you just repeat that, please?
I was wondering what your view is of parents of children who are potentially vulnerable. Do they need to change the way they are laying down the law, if you like, at home about when you can go out or when you need to be home and all those sorts of things?
No, I totally agree with you. You know, what we do have are young girls who are vulnerable, who are at risk, who don't have the appropriate safeguarding in place. I think Operation Retriever, which is the case in Derby that you mentioned in your report, really highlighted a lot of the failure of a lot of agencies, including the police, social services, and families as well. So families have a significant role in terms of putting the protective factors around their children. And they've got to recognise that there are predatory gangs out there on the street who are so attuned to identifying those young girls who are at risk and then really victimising and manipulating girls, channeling them into sexual violence and into grooming.
Detective Superintendent, what's your advice to parents?
Well, we've done a lot of work with parents, with carers, with children themselves through working with schools and actually raising this as a real issue, that it is happening. It is happening to children within Lancashire, within our communities. It's important to recognise the signs. It's important actually to be confident that there is somewhere to turn to. There are agencies who can assist to get out of this exploitative situation.
But is this often families where the children won't necessarily listen to their parents when they say don't go out, don't do this, you know, be in by a particular time?
There are many vulnerable children, and it's our job and our partners' jobs to protect those individuals, and we will do that. It's important that we give those messages. It's important we recognise that vulnerability and we work together to actually remove them from a potentially exploitative situation to stop it happening in the first place.
Ian Critchley, Alyas Karmani, thank you both very much indeed.